History is not the past, it is the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history.
We would like to begin today by acknowledging and honoring the indigenous communities native to this region and recognize that Weston is built on indigenous homelands and resources. We recognize the Kickapoo, Kaw, Osage, and Sioux people as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. We pay respect to them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold their example in our words and actions. Thank you.
Good morning, Weston. It is so good to see you this morning, and thank you so much for joining us in the celebration of the second annual Juneteenth Heritage Jubilee right here in Weston, Missouri.
Guys, I would implore you to listen today with a heart for understanding and progress, and thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Angela, and everyone involved for making this happen, guys. Proud to be a member of Weston and a part of this.
Ago! Amen! Ago! Amen! Nke ago! Amen!
Try, omanyaba.
Yo!
Try, omanyaba.
Yo!
Try, omanyaba.
Yo!
Menashime.
Manashi ho!
Nima ho. Nama ho. Hey, atakpakpa. Okpeleje. Bokenkle. Bata wadane na ohawo. Inofia no wa ba fe ya bie. Eyi omanye. Hey! Wanime. Ka waname. Hey! Wanini kanswai. Ka wanana kanswai. Ngene wanchanye fem. Wachenye ye efonku. She wanta no wake nyake. Tole. Nye tole kenye dengme. Fen efe flu. Wanchanye gbene. Nye ba jowo. Ye ofe chele ding. Ale no keta ko dronku ahwe. E ba gbe ye wo koklon. Ni ajo. Ni mla akwen. Wanye Dinah Robinson. Mane wanchabo. Boy wa wadomo bi ene. Mane jendin wo yo. Ketu twa. Ke shai ne bolewo. Atwa pe wono be mi. Twa omanyaba.
You know, when I think about the stories of the indigenous people who were displaced from this land and the black enslaved people of Platte County, I realize that many of our young people know nothing about this. Their stories are mostly underrepresented. They're not in the textbooks. They're untold. And I think it's important that we do programs like this to be able to understand history so that we can avoid the traps of repeating history and especially the negative things about history that could occur. So we have a very important movement, I believe, in the day and age in which we're living. As we began to understand the stories, many of those stories transpired here, right here on the grounds on which we find ourselves this morning.
Come with me now, a ways back in time, to a time before Weston was Weston, a time when it was the home of the Sac, the Fox, the Kanza, the Kickapoo. This forested land, rich with game, streams and lakes full of fish, and life abundant, was dictated by the whims of the Missouri River. Let's wander on down now to the banks of the Big Muddy and learn about the Corps of Discovery Expedition.
Captain Clark continued, "The situation here in this area appears to be very eligible for a town. The valley, rich and extensive, with a small brook meandering through it, and one part of the Missouri Riverbank affording a good landing for boats. A handsome situation for a town. We killed and ate several deer this day." So ends William Clark's journal of July 2, 1804, here in the area of Weston.
Well, it may seem far-fetched, a black man in the Old West, a real American hero. It's a true tale 'cause his name was York. It's a true tale 'cause his name was York. York, 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 York. A thunderstorm rose up in sight. A great flood at one time was going to swallow up William Clark's life. And just like the wind, this I do. I quickly rushed out and I saved William Clark's life in a nick or two. Clark promised reward when we all got back to St. Louis. He said a man should be honored when he saved another's back. However, I really don't want much except to live like an eagle in this land, like you and you and you. This I can.
How did you become a part of the Lewis and Clark expedition?
William Clark and I, we were childhood friends. We grew up as young boys, played together. Well, of course, in those peculiar times called slavery, around about the age when I was getting around 13 years old, his papa decided to sold me off to him and give me to his son, Clark, as a birthday present to be his servant, his slave. That kind of changed the relationship a tad, you might say.
So you were a birthday present.
Yes.
What were your duties and responsibilities with the Corps of Expedition?
I was known as the company clerk. I cooked the meals. I went out and I hunted. I fished. I did a little doctoring. When the Corps would go out and would come across, and we met some 40 indigenous people, tribes, they sent me out usually as to be a scout as well, also as an ambassador.
What would you like for future generations to remember you being?
I was not given an opportunity to marry because I was called into this service with Captain Clark and the rest of the crew of Discovery. But I really would love to settle down and have a family. And I really, really, really would love to take my bride and my family out and explore the strange new world, to seek out new life and to become a part of this thing that you call freedom. Just a taste. Oh, what a sweet taste that will be.
Wade in the water.
Underground Railroad thing.
Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. See that band all dressed in white.
God's gonna trouble the water.
It looks like the man with the Israelites.
Yeah,
God's gonna trouble the water. Come on and wade in the water.
Children,
Wade in the water. Children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
See that man all dressed in red.
God's gonna trouble the water.
I said it looks like the man that Moses led.
God's gonna trouble the water.
We said
Wade in the water.
Come on now,
Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Come on, and God's gonna trouble the water.
Yeah.
God's gonna trouble the water.
For more than 30 years, Weston had all the right factors working together to make it the hemp capital of the world. Settlers from Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee brought their seeds and their slaves with them to Platte County. Slave labor was one of the primary factors for the crop success in Platte County and, frankly, this country's western expansion. Hemp is one of the most strongest natural fibers in the world. It has a high tensile strength. And before the invention of coiled steel wire or plastic, hemp was used in cordage and rope and fabrics and basically everything used to package goods in this country. The soil here in Platte County and around Weston is all wind-blown loess, which is soil. Basically, we've got Western Nebraska's topsoil. And while there was some work required in growing hemp, primarily it was on the back end. Once it was actually cast out of a bushel basket onto the ground, it really didn't require a lot of work, and it doesn't require a lot of work to grow now. But once it does need to be harvested in the late summer months and early fall, that's when the real work comes in.
In the old days, breaking was done by hand, one of the hardest jobs known to man.
Platte County was really one of the corner posts of the Confederacy and of slavery. We had more slave owners. We had more slaves per slave owner and had a higher percentage of all of those than any of the other 6 counties in the Platte Purchase, and frankly higher than the counties down the Missouri River in Little Dixie. As you know, prior to 1881, the Missouri River was right at the base of town. They had the ability to pull up 10 steamships at a time. And during harvest season, there were wagons all up and down Main Street trying to get down to the landing to load these down to river ports down below in Glasgow and St. Louis, and then on to some of the larger rope and twine manufacturers in Louisville. All of my ancestors came from Kentucky, a bunch of brothers, and they all came to western Kansas via Illinois. But one brother, George Washington Galloway, settled on a farm in 1848, just about 5 miles north of here, very close to where I live now. And in researching him and understanding what kind of a person he was a man who was one of the guys here with the Blue Lodges, and he was an anti-abolitionist. He had slaves. And in understanding that and researching more about the hemp business and trying to get a grasp of that, going through the slave schedules for Platte County, of which there were thousands. If you look at the slave schedule for 1850, for instance, there were almost 3,000 slaves in Platte County, and there were 600 slave owners. You know, after 1870, after the railroads came through, and after steel coiled wire was invented, and after, frankly, the river moved course in 1881, it really stopped being a staple crop here, and hemp production generally stopped, and this town went from a high of 5,000 people to less than 700 people. So, you know, reading through that, I think it's a sobering reminder of our past, and I think it's important to kind of remember. It's really taken everybody to get us to where we are now, and that everybody has value, and each American story is unique and valid. So, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about this. Appreciate it.
In America, land of the free, built by the enslaved. Monticello, Mount Vernon, the U.S. Capitol, the White House, the Weston livery. Clay, water, heat, infused with captive sweat, blood, toil, fear, and hope. For 200 years, here on the land of the Fox and the Sac and the Iowa, dwellings and livelihoods, churches and relationships were built. Each one brick by brick by brick, imbued with the labor and power and skill of stolen black hands.
I know of a place on the bank of the Missouri River at the crossroads of the Santa Fe and Oregon trails, home of the Sac, Fox, Kansas, and Kickapoo, a place where York, strolling ahead of Lewis and Clark, set his left foot down and the whole world tilted west. A place where our ancestors broke their backs breaking hemp, laying bricks to build a town called Weston, a town that almost forgot them. A town not unlike a town 30 miles downriver that called out to my grandfather, Basil North Sr., who came from Hartville, Missouri, which he left when he was 16 on a mule that he bought and rode 118 miles to Jefferson City, Missouri to attend Lincoln University. He later saved up enough to send for my grandmother. They both became educators and moved to Kansas City. Their love story is much like that of the one that is told of Angela and Joyce's great-great-grandmother, Dinah Wright Robinson, who as a laundress and a seamstress purchased herself free, then the freedom of her husband Thomas and their children, Moses and Eliza Jane. Yes, we must remember their names. These are our origin stories. Maybe that's why we love this country even when it doesn't love us. Still proud to claim these towns where we are from because we know who came before us. Our feet are firmly planted on their shoulders. Those whose light shines brightly beyond February, right into eternity. And so I sing of Langston and Parker, Miss Bluford and Mary Lou, Old Buck, Leon Jordan, Horace and Bruce, Sarah Rector, Junius Groves, Tom Bass, and Anna Jones, Chester Franklin, Bernard Powell, and D.A. Holmes, Dinah Robinson, Raymond Didell, Moses Wilson, and Mabel Emery Bell. I chant their names almost as if holy because you have to be careful about who you allow to teach your history. Like Malcolm said, folks that won't treat you right won't teach you right. We must tell our own stories, reclaim the narrative. I say read, research, collect, interpret, curate, archive, document, observe, and report. There is a little brown girl in a classroom who has no idea how beautiful her Afro puffs are, and she needs to know. There is a little brown boy who doesn't see himself reflected in a biased curriculum, so he loses interest, gets labeled with a behavior disorder, drops out, runs across the right cop on the wrong day, and becomes a headline and a hashtag. He needed to know. There are little white children in schools all over America being taught that the world revolves around them. Before they grow up to believe that it does, they need to know. I know of a place that was once as far west as you could go, where more than 400 wandering souls are now free at last, where we travel back to the future by remembering the past. This is the home of countless black lives that certainly mattered. I have no choice but to sing their names. Thank you.
Glenn North. Thank you, Glenn.
Weston is for you, Weston is for me. History tells us that we have a story that began began in hardship. Now we live in unity. Weston belongs to you and me.
Weston is for you, Weston is for me. History tells us that we have a story that began in hardship. Now we live in unity. Weston belongs to you and me.
Along the Missouri, a town called Weston came into being in 1837. The land was rich and so full of game.
Weston belongs to you and me.
As we were brought here from old Kentucky and the fields of Virginia to Green Platte County, had our families in the hills of Weston.
Weston belongs to you and me.
We know that by the time the Civil War began, Platte County census records indicated that there were exactly 2,559 enslaved people here. Now, it was illegal for these people to receive a formal education. I'll say that again. Prior to 1865, educating enslaved black people with book knowledge was against the law of the United States. In Weston, there was at least one white person who took the risk to teach enslaved people to read and write and do sums. The Reverend Frederick Starr, a Presbyterian minister, came to Weston in 1850. He was, of course, an abolitionist. Reverend Starr encouraged white people to not only educate their slaves, both children and adults, and then to set them free. But Weston, as we know, was very much a Southern-leaning pro-slavery town and not ready for this progressivism. Reverend Starr was indicted and run out of town in 1856. Missouri was, of course, a border state. We did not secede from the Union, but had plenty of Confederate sympathizers. And so the Emancipation Proclamation, which was signed into law by President Lincoln on January 1st, 1863, did not apply to Missouri because we had not seceded from the Union. And so, despite all the abolitionist work that was going on across the river in Kansas, a free state, slavery was left untouched here in Weston during the war. The state of Missouri finally abolished chattel slavery in January 1865, several months prior to the surrender of Robert E. Lee and the formal end of the war in April 1865. So with the abolition of slavery in Missouri, educating blacks was no longer illegal, but it was, of course, segregated. After 1865, impromptu schools for the formerly enslaved cropped up around here in churches, homes, and barns. The first teachers were former slaves who had secretly learned on their own. Now, the brick building over there behind me on 806 Thomas Street in the alley once housed the German Methodist Church. That small building is still standing and is now a private home. It was deeded to the Weston Board of Education in 1868, so 3 years after the end of the war. This then became the colored school, and by about 1900, it was named for the esteemed educator Mary McLeod Bethune from South Carolina. So until 1954, the year I was born, Weston educated black students only through the 8th grade. For higher education or high school, children had to leave their families. Sometimes the whole family uprooted and moved to places like Kansas City, St. Joe, or Leavenworth that were large enough to support a black segregated high school.
My primary job was to educate the Negro children from ages 6 to 14 in grades 1st through the 8th, and I did it gladly for nearly 40 years. Some of my students were older adults. I taught anyone who wanted to learn. I never turned students away or made them feel awkward about being too old or too young or too poor or too well-to-do to learn. Regardless of their circumstances, they were welcomed. Sometimes a few boys, Mr. Jerry Adam, are you here today? And Mr. Carl Felling, are you here today? Hey, gentlemen. Those boys would sneak a peek through the windows at what we were up to in our schoolhouse. Caught ya. Our classes were always lively and interesting. I thought to myself, if some school children from other schools were curious enough to visit us, then so be it. I invited those boys to come in and join us and be quiet now. I hope you learned something terrific. Did I tell you at Christmas we put on a little concert and the voices of those children were beautiful and filled the halls with such promise? I'd hear them sing, "Fall on your knees, oh, hear the angels' voices." Oh, those angels' voices. From the depths of my soul, my belief was that any student could rise beyond their station. The fear of failure, the fear that my community would fall into despair and disrepair kept me up at night. The fragility of students and adults who lack the bare necessities but look to you for a glimmer of hope means you must be far more than a teacher. Yes, you must be more like a guardian angel with eyes in the back of your head and a heart as big and large as the man or the woman in the moon.
We have a scepter to present to the king, the homecoming king of 2021, Cameron Williams. Cameron Williams also has a brick at the Dinah Robinson courtyard. I don't know if you knew that, Cameron, but your name is memorialized up at the courtyard. Cameron Williams, ladies and gentlemen.
James Moses Wilson was born 1850 in Virginia. It is not sure if he was a slave or a free man, but it is assumed that he traveled from Virginia to Missouri, and he arrived with his slave owner, who was there to set up farming in the area. When he was able, after freedom, he went north and settled first in Marshall, Missouri, and there he met and married his wife, Della Bursey. He worked as a farm laborer to support his family. But around 1890, dance bands began to organize. Moses was a musician and played the fiddle, and various other instruments were his passion. So much so that he taught his 7 sons to play the various instruments. Moses and his sons formed a ragtime band, Moses and his Lambs. Moses' Lambs were the most popular dance orchestra in the area. Moses was also active in the political scene. He ran for and won a seat on the city council during Reconstruction. In 1908, the family moved from Weston to Atchison, Kansas, where Moses purchased a farm. He continued to work his farm and play music until his illness and a heart attack silenced his music. Moses Wilson, 58 years old, died 14 June 1910.
Now, Kansas City supported 2 municipal bands, the Heiner Band, which was a white band that played pretty much straight-ahead military-style music, and the African-American Dan Blackburn Band. Now, the Blackburn Band was played at the 18th and Vine area, and they melded together ragtime jazz, blues, pop music, and concert band music. And their Sunday night concerts staged at Parade Park at 17th and Paseo attracted up to 6,000 people per performance, bringing together all elements of the community.
You know, as a result of the collaboration that I see happening among historical organizations, historical societies, and others, I see that, in fact, this collaboration is leading us to a path of healing where we can understand one another and appreciate one another and appreciate the experiences that we have had as a people, as people groups. And there's always two sides of history, but it's important that we come in civil discussion to understand one another and our histories.
Dinah Robinson had been born enslaved, relocated to Weston with her enslaver in 1840, and then bought her and her family's freedom in 1859. She subsequently bought the property where the courtyard is now located, as well as buying several other properties over her lifetime in Weston.
Know that we love you and we thank you and we feel so embraced by this wonderful historic town of Weston. And from the bottom of my heart, I love you all and thank you, thank you, thank you.
I thought it was very cool. I've always loved history, so and the culture is just amazing. I just really like it, yeah.
Weston is for you, Weston is for me. History tells us that we have a story that began in in hardship. Now we live in unity. Weston belongs to you and me.
Weston is for you. Weston is for me.
Explore the rich history of Weston's Black community with the all-new Weston Black Heritage Walking and Driving Tour. Featuring 30 culturally significant locations. Complimentary brochures are available at Weston City Hall or email the Black Ancestors Awareness Campaign at BAAC1837@gmail.com.
Weston belongs.